Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen. Sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa maulana Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to the viewers. Welcome to another installment of our Youth Breeze segment of the Academia Libraries programs. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our latest segment, which will be with Brother Abdud-Daiyaaan Petersen. And we're going to be looking at the topic of Cape Muslim heritage, stories and reflections. And but before we do that, alhamdulillah, we have a really amazing guest. And it's a guest that I know very well. We've worked together on the MSA at UCT on multiple occasions. And I think really is a role model for young people, because this is what this show is about. Youth Breeze is about looking at what young Muslims are doing in the Muslim community. What type of work are they doing? What inspirational people do we have out there? We have many inspirational people, but they don't always get the platform to share the type of work that they are doing. And also looking at what young people are doing to solve the problems that we have in the world today. And how do we use our faith, how do we use our religion as a benchmark, as a tool, as a resource to assist us and to guide us in making those decisions for our projects. So welcome Abdud-Daiyaaan to the program. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and shukran for having me.
Yeah, so Daiyaaan, you obviously, I know you very well, and for those of you who don't know, Abdud-Daiyaaan is a honors student in environmental sciences at UCT, specializing in human geography, but you also have a whole other life out there, and almost like an alter ego in a way.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. Tell us about the journey that you've undertaken. What has led you to adopt this life where you've got your career, but that career, from what it seems, is not always in direct alignment to your passion. And I think a lot of people experience life like that there's a career and then there's also your passion, there's your calling. So tell us about your journey. You've got your career, you've got your degree at the university, but you've also got this calling. So introduce us to that a bit.
Could I first ask, when you talk about my career, do you refer to my studies?
Well, your studies, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
okay.
Your professional, formal career.
Yeah. Look, I suppose I should start from the very beginning, where it all started and what led me to where I am now. Obviously, as most university students, it starts in grade 11 in matric, the ending of high school, and wondering, what am I going to do with my life? I can't use profanities, but perhaps I might have used profanities in my thinking at that time. But yeah, it was about, what am I going to do with my life? How can I make money? Coming from a working class community that we find ourselves in, a lot of our ideals is about upwards mobility, how to improve ourselves, firstly financially. It doesn't really talk much to how we were raised, but rather about the society that we find ourselves in and the struggles that we see others struggling with. And so naturally for many of us, within the community, the ideal is to, carve a career where you can make a lot of money, to improve yourself, to improve your family, and to help, your fellow community members. And so for myself, I was, alhamdulillah, I had a keen passion for mathematics, for science, and so on, despite having a strong interest in geography and history. But as I mentioned, because of our social conditioning within the community, the focus was more on how best can I make money, how best, what is the best job that I can get into. And so the focus was then put on the mathematics and the science. And the options was then, what are the types of jobs, or what are the types of study options that I have that I can use these abilities for. And so there were options like actuarial science, engineering, pure mathematics, going into that field. And there are many others, biology, medicine, such as yourself, and so on. And it was in matric, I think, that, I had gone to visit an actuary, and I realized, what, this is not for me. This guy is just sitting in an office 24/7, stressing his mind out about, this data and that statistic. And I realized, definitely not for me. And then I went to go visit some family friends of ours whose son was an engineer. And I believe he was in town planning at the time, but he had studied engineering. And we went there and I met with him, and he's a very eclectic, very a people's person, and I realized that this is something that I would love to do. It's best of both worlds. You can, enjoy life, enjoy the community, and at the same time, you can be in one of these fields that are possibilities for our community to further ourselves. Again, that was my thinking at the time, and that was also, the social conditioning in our community, dentist, doctor, lawyer, engineer, as it goes. And so I had applied for engineering. Alhamdulillah, I got in. And then, university started. I'm at UCT, I'm in this new degree, this new identity, as a university student, a UCT student. And I'm so excited. Also, with that comes the UCT pride, the engineering pride, that, I got in, and I am here on top of the hill, on the mountain, overlooking Cape Town. And all of that came crashing down, I would say, the end of the first quarter, when I realized, actually, you have to put in a lot of effort to maintain the level of marks that you were used to back in high school. Not to put down the struggles of high school students, especially matriculants at this time. Each of us, in fact myself, it was hard work when I was in high school. But coming to university, it was just another ball game. It was a different type of learning. And that is also when I started to realize, perhaps, the field that I'm currently finding myself, the type of studies I'm finding myself in, is not conducive to my style of learning and my interests, because of the marks. Not necessarily so much the effort that I'm putting in, but rather, am I willing to put in so much effort for something that perhaps I'm not really as passionate about, because of the conditioning that I mentioned. And alhamdulillah, I was afforded the opportunity to go on a 10-day hike, 6-day hike in the Atlas Mountains in 2019. It was around August, so this was just after first semester. And it was really in those mountains that I had a spiritual awakening. And I realized, what, it's not for me. And I was making a lot of dua. We were making salah in the mountains with Muslim Berber people, that were on a different daraja to us. Their whole thinking is completely different. And I never shared any of my struggles with them, but just being with them and seeing a different outlook on life, and a simplicity to life, but also a deep understanding of life, a deep understanding of people. These Berbers, we in our full hiking gear, they in broken sloffies and takis, taking us through the mountains with ease. And it was interacting with them, sitting in tents, sitting in caves, and so on. When I realized, what, this is not for me, and I need to change, what I'm doing, because it's not sustainable for my mental health. It's also not sustainable for moving forward with a career. And by the time I came back to Cape Town, I then went to deregister from the course I was doing, and then I was looking for other options, and I found something that was sort of the best of both worlds, in terms of a mix of geography, not so much history, but the social sciences, and the hard sciences, which was environmental science, the EGS department at UCT. And that is when I applied, and I had to appeal, to get in and so on. And alhamdulillah, I got in, and about almost 4 years later, I'm now busy with my honors in this degree.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
So I think you've mentioned a couple of really important things. One of them is you said that you took a step back from your current situation and you just reflected on whether or not this is the right thing for us. And sometimes we do have the tendency that life becomes so fast and that you get sucked in to the flow of life that we forget to ask the big questions about and reevaluating our circumstances, and that's what you've done. And what advice would you give to other young people who might be stuck in a certain course or degree in terms of finding for themselves something which would sustain them?
Sure. I suppose it's two things. Number one is sometimes we do hit a boulder or a hard rock and we think we can't pass it. That's the first issue, and we just want to turn back and give up. Perhaps that happened with me in engineering, but I made the decision and I'm not there anymore, and alhamdulillah, I'm happy now. But sometimes it is worth it, just to put in that little bit of more effort, just to, the gold might be just behind that barrier, but we don't perceive it, And so turn to Allah, make dua, make istikhara about the choices, that you want to make. But then also, I think it's so important to take that step back, retreat into nature, go for hikes, go for runs, go for a swim, whatever activity or hobby that you have that allows you to take your mind off of, your daily tasks and your daily stresses, engage a bit more in that type of hobby to take your mind off it, and you'll slowly start to realize that you have a greater perception of the reality of your life, and you'll be able to make clearer decisions, after having stepped back, because it's we perceive it as easy to make a decision when you're within the cloud, right? But we don't realize that we are clouded. But if you actually take a step back, and you look at it at what it really is, it will definitely help you to figure things out a bit better. And so I do advise, for many young students, many youth, to take that step back, and just reassess, reanalyze, and also do some introspection into yourself, into your passions, see what do you like, what are you good at, what do you feel passionately about, but also what with that can you do to help others, to help humanity, or to help whatever cause you're passionate about, and sort of find an intersection of that.
One of my teachers used to say that you ask yourself, make a list of what you're good at, and if you don't think you're good at something, you probably don't know yourself well enough.
Yeah.
And then make another list of what are the things that society needs, and then kind of connect the two. And ideally, that should be your passion. It should be something that you enjoy, but also does have some benefit to the creation.
Yeah.
And creation doesn't just mean human beings; it refers to everything. And you've done that in a very interesting way. You also have a life as a Muslim researcher of the Cape, looking specifically at the history of slavery, the history of immigration and politics. And tell us about that. Tell us about, what inspired you to do that, and what would you say are some of the big learning points that you've come across? We've put on the poster the foundation of the early Muslim community. So what has that journey taught you about the early Muslim community, and what lessons can we learn from that?
So starting with your first point, what inspired me to embark on this path. I suppose initially just broadly, and I probably mention this quite often in other talks I've given or interviews, is the fact that I was privileged to grow up in front of great-grandparents, my mother's grandparents, up until the age of around 18, 19, I had these 80, 90-year-olds in the house that were still active, had a their memory lasted till the end. Brilliant memories.
Wow.
And so my bedtime stories were stories of old Cape Town and stories of, immigration from India to the Cape, and of white settlers that had mixed with Malays and produced these families, and so on, and about who my forebears were and how important it is to be proud of that and to embrace our different identities that we find ourselves born into. And so that was, my initial, I suppose, obviously not since birth, but since a toddler, my initial kick into an interest, in this sort of realm. But the actual tipping point that led me to this was in 2017, January. I took a trip to India with my mom and my sister and some relatives. And we went to my grandfather's village in India. And I got to meet my great-grandfather's sister and my grandfather's cousins and, all these relatives, and seeing, Cape Town, like our family's faces, in this village, everywhere. And my great-grandfather's house and like his carvings on the door. And, it was such a spiritual and personal experience being there. And after coming back to Cape Town, I just wanted to know more. I wanted to know more about, why do we have a village in India, but we live here in South Africa? And, we're in India, but where do we come from? And how did they come to South Africa? And, find out a bit more about those stories. And I saw an advertisement or a post somewhere that you can go to the Cape Town archives in Roland Street and you can find your family's immigration records there. So I thought, you know what, it's worth a try to just see if I can find something. I was very pessimistic. Why would my family even have records at all? And I went to the archives and I found like this thick file of my mother's entire family's immigration since like the 1890s up until the 1970s, moving to and fro from India, and like photographs of my great-great-grandfather and my great-grandfather as a baby. And it was mind-blowing that these things which are seemingly inaccessible to us as a family are sitting right there in a box in Roland Street.
And is this accessible? So let's say there's somebody out there who's listening who wants to learn about their family history. What would they have to do?
They would, you can contact me. I do this as my alter ego. But there is a website that you can go to. It's NAAIRS.
NAAIRS.
I'm not going to police on the pronunciation of that website. But you can search that, and then there's like it's I think KAB. So you go into that website and there's different like repositories, and you click on KAB, which is the Cape Town one, and then you just type in your surname and like the name of like that ancestor of yours that came to South Africa from India. It's mostly Indian immigration, because it only starts like 1904 onwards.
Are there repositories for, let's say, people with Malay heritage as well, like the Indian one that you've?
I'll explain that now. But just in terms of the Indian immigration, we also realize, like, with this, like your surname Amien, Amien, there could have been Amin, Amen. If his name was Hassan, could have been Hassan, Hassen. So you'll have to play with the spellings, because imagine a British administrator sitting there at the desk, and you come from India with a surname like Bare, and he doesn't know how to spell this, and so you say your surname and he just writes there Brey, Brey, or many other very complicated Cockney surnames sometimes, and you come and they just write it how they want to. So we have to play around with the spellings in searching for it. But you go there, you look for the references, go to the archives, and you can easily view these books or these records. In terms of like the Malay. It's not really immigration, we have to understand it in the context of slavery. And I think that perhaps, takes us on a different route. But just coming back to, my inspiration into doing this research, to the initial question, upon having discovered these records, right, that of my family and so on, I thought to myself, if there's this, surely there's a whole lot more for the rest of my family. And from then on, since that day, I've been going on a systematic basis, trying to find out more. Initially about my family, then about other families, then about the community, then it became about slavery, then it became about political exile, and it just grew into this whole project on what is Cape society. And now it's more focusing on how do we fit into an Indian Ocean immigration system. And moving even further back into Chinese and Persian trading boats that came to the Cape in the 1400s and 1200s, and so on. So that was my initial kickstart, into this sort of research.
So if you're a young person watching this interview right now, what would you say to them to motivate them to look at their own family history? For example, I know when I was in med school, my psychiatry lecturer used to say that one of the things that you should do to make yourself feel better, she gave us a whole list of things, but the last thing she mentioned was actually do your family tree. Or if you don't have a family tree, create your family tree. In your journey of discovering your family tree and other people's family tree, what are some of the benefits of actually looking at your family history, or what are the benefits of looking at your heritage? I was to ask that question.
There are multiple facets to that. I think I'll first address the danger of it.
Okay.
The danger of it is the issue of pride and exclusivity and becoming insular, where you look at it from a paternalistic perspective of this is my pedigree, and you're proud about, let's say you have like royal ancestors, or like Indonesian royal ancestors, for example, and you focus only on that, right? And you become proud about it, and you feel superior, to others, based on that. That is some of the dangers, that could come from, doing, a task like this. Another thing is also the issue of like, ethnic isolation, where again, you're Indonesian or Indian royal ancestor, or just you're a Cockney, for example, right? And you isolate yourself to just one sort of identity based on one tangent, in your tree. And you isolate yourself from the world, from the rest of the communities in Cape Town, even from an Indian perspective, all the many different communities in India, which also, presents many dangers and social ills. Apartheid, being one of them, separate development, viewing yourself as separate, as different, and so on. But if you are going to do it in a more inclusive manner, in a more sustainable manner, at looking at, all of your branches, all the different tributaries and, different origins and how you connect to other people, you start to realize, number one, you are connected to everybody around the world. I think there's like 6 degrees of relation between you and someone in like Alaska, for example. You know somebody who relate to someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who's an Inuit somewhere. So you can see the globalization and connectivity between people, which leads to a greater understanding of, that feeling of Ubuntu, that interpersonal connections that you have. And there's an interesting word I learned the other week, conviviality, which is, that sort of, recognition and friendliness between people. And doing a project like this definitely will increase, that as well. The other benefit that I would say also personally, coming from an incredibly mixed background, is you develop or you strengthen your sense of identity and belonging. Because as you are going about on this project, you're realizing that number one, you don't hold one sole identity. Rather, you are, the melting pot or coming together of many different identities. And with that, you're also building a new identity.
In yourself.
In yourself, exactly. And so, having an identity and knowing where you come from, which, contributes to your identity, and your movement between identities also increases your
appreciation.
Not appreciation. I can't get to the word. Your self-esteem.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Because again, coming back to belonging, like that you fit in these different circles, in these different spheres, and you do indeed belong in certain circles and so on.
Because one of the big problems of the modern world is loneliness.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that from a medical perspective that the feeling of loneliness has the same physiological effect on the body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Yeah. That's what our scientists are telling us. And when I think of heritage, when I think of when you look at your family history, that you are part of a living legacy, that idea of that feeling of connection to something greater than just yourself can be a great tool to show that you're actually not alone.
Yeah.
That you carry within you, in your own body, the sacrifices of thousands of generations of people. And when you look at the next person, they may not be Muslim, but they're Bani Adam.
Yes.
And Allah says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا الْبَنِي Adam. We have ennobled the children of Adam. And in that way, perhaps the study of heritage, the study of the self, where we come from, can actually assist us in our faith. What do you think about that?
Sure. There were a few ayat that I previously had focused on that pertain specifically, to this in the Quran. I think it was Surah Hujarat. I can't remember it exactly now.
That we made you into different tribes to know
one
another.
Exactly that one.
Yes.
Where Allah affirms, that وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. There we go. He has made us into different tribes and nations so that we may get to know one another. But specifically that verb, ta'arafu, the scale of the verb is a sort of a symbiotic scale where it's, one, I do to you as you do to me. And so it's this relationship that we have with other people. And it is as if Allah is telling us, there are people that are different to you, and Allah has created you for the specific purpose of having that, dual relationship with each other. And so, apart from just the family tree, but getting to know your background, where you come from, and affirming to yourself that I come from, this background, whether you are ascribed to a specific identity or not, inevitably either you're born in Cape Town, or you're born in South Africa, or you belong to a liberal community, however you want to ascribe to a community. There are other communities that exist, liberal and conservative, for example. And so, despite all of your differences, the fact is, you have been created to get to know one another. And there are so many benefits, of getting to know one another. Things that they definitely have that you can learn from. Things you have that they can learn from. And ultimately, the goal is to better, humanity, and not just in a selfish way.
And like you mentioned, one of the risks of heritage is that you become so proud of what you think you are.
Yes. Yeah.
And you don't actually integrate with those who are around you, because at some point we all have the same heritage in the sense that we all come from Nabi Adam. And there's maybe this tendency among certain communities that we stick to the people that look like us and are exactly like us.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have this idea of community, because often communities organize themselves around similarities.
Yes. Yeah.
But what the Quran is telling us is that we have those communities, but we should still venture out and get to know people who are different to us.
Yes. Yeah.
So this idea of unity through diversity, So we know that there are benefits to certainly learning about heritage. And part of your work has been about looking at some of the early developments of the Muslim community at the Cape. So tell us a bit about that.
I suppose you would have to, start off with some of the first Muslims that had come to South Africa before we touch on the community, as we know it today, which is also a contested, idea. But one of the first possible Muslims to have come to Cape Town was an individual, a stowaway slave by the name of Abraham van Batavia, and he came in around 1656. I think
1656.
So just immediately after
just after Johan Riebeeck,
he just comes, he sets up a little fort here, and he
And how did he come?
He was a stowaway, so he jumped on a ship and he just
So he wasn't a slave.
No, he was enslaved in Batavia.
In Batavia, okay.
And then he jumped on a ship as if to escape his slavery. Come to the Cape, jump off here, and then I think he was re-enslaved. Again, it's not a laughing matter, but it's just the irony. It's very cynical. But we have to make it a bit humorous to deal with our traumas of the past. But so he was possibly one of the first Muslims, considering he came from Batavia. He was part of the enslaved community, and his name, he has a biblical name. There's a strong possibility he was Muslim, but we will never know for certain. But other Muslims that did come to the Cape were some of your Makassarese exiles that were sent from, I think, the 1660s, well into your 1690s. The most prominent of which is, of course, Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar. I'm not going to talk about his story. It's incredibly well known. Books written about it, many hikayat, folk stories about him. But just to note that he was the most prominent of these Makassarese nobles, or orang kaya, to be sent at the Cape. And to continue our
what is orang kaya?
So to continue our discussion of these early Muslims, just to explain what orang kaya means. Orang in Malay means a person, right? People, a man, and kaya literally means rich, right? So it's rich men, noble men. I like to think of it in Singapore. There's a type of a jam custard made of coconut milk and eggs, which they call kaya jam. It's called that because it's rich to eat.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So just relating that, richness, luxury, opulence, all of these things to that same word, so these rich, noble people, these were the orang kaya. The Dutch sort of, in their records wrote it as orang kayang or orang kayan. And so when you go to the Kramat in Constantia, on the plaques of Tuan Said Mahmoud's, in his Kramat, it's written the orang kayan. So you can see sort of, the development of this word into a Cape lexicon. But these were these noblemen that was exiled here, from, your early mid-1600s onwards, even into the late 1700s. And just to drop some names that are significant, of Muslims that were sent here is, for example, Imam Jaudan Tapa. He was exiled here. I can't remember the exact date that he was exiled, but in around 1712, he led a slave rebellion at Groot Constantia. So the wine farm, Groot Constantia, 1712, he led a rebellion, incited some slaves to rebel and to run away, from their masters and escape, the torment and the oppression that they were facing, here in Cape Town, on the farm, under the baas, and so on. And, unfortunately, it's quite sad that he was, eventually captured. And after that, they punished him. I believe they I forgot the exact term for this punishment, but they basically tore his limbs apart, until he was no more. And not only that, they left him in the field for, as it says, the birds and the air to consume him.
And he is buried?
We don't know. We don't know exactly where he's buried, but it's possible his bones were just, left there. So his body, I say 99% chance, still on Groot Constantia, the bones of one of the first, shaheeds of the Cape.
Wow.
And, you know, one of the first, you know, I wouldn't say protesters, but, you know, activists at the Cape, you know, is there at Groot Constantia on that farm, on that wine farm. And so, you know, he's an important individual to consider, you know, but again, before we come to the community, you know, just some of these individuals who are important to note. Another one by the name of, let me not go into him because he's a slave, but his name is September of Bugis, so I'll touch on him in a few minutes' time. But some other political exiles that were sent here would be Haji Matarim and Tuan Said Alawi, right? So these two individuals were exiled to the Cape in 1744. So Haji Matarim, he was a scholar that lived on the island of Madura in Indonesia, within the court of Matarim. So it was a royal court, a kingdom that they had on Madura. And, you know, he was a learned individual, a spiritual individual, and, you know, he was an imam in the kingdom. And then the other individual is Tuan Said Alawi, right? His actual name, I believe, was, I think it was Muhammad, I can't remember. Anyway, Alawi al-Habashi. Let's call him Alawi al-Habashi. You know, he's known as Alawi.
Habashi,
So
Ethiopia.
He was, so there's a, within the Ba'alawi clan, right, there's a select family that moved to Ethiopia, you know, the east coast of Africa.
Okay.
And they then, you know, adopted the title of al-Habashi, but still subscribing to that family, the Ba'alawi family.
Okay.
And so this...
And this was before 1700s.
Yeah,
this
yeah,
was long
this was,
before.
you know, quite
Okay.
a while back. And so his family, before he was born, then moved back to Yemen and settled in Mukha, Mocha. So, you know, Cafe Mocha,
Yeah.
the port of Mocha, where the coffee was brought from.
Okay.
He settled there. And so he was born there, and he then embarked from Mocha to Matarim. And he also became, you know, a spiritual person, an advisor, a religious person. And because of his Islamic background and probably due to his Sayyid lineage, he was afforded the opportunity to become a royal advisor along with the other guy, Haji Matarim, and they became, as we say, brasa, you know, on the island. You know, both of them advisors and so on. And eventually, you know, they had a bit of a tiff, and, you know, they parted ways. But then the Dutch comes, and the Dutch tries to take over the island, and the Dutch also realizes, you know, their strategic positioning, you know, that they have, you know, within the royal court. And so in the Dutch mind, it would then make sense to take them away so that they don't influence, you know, the politics of the island anymore. And so they take these two individuals and put them on Robben Island in 1744. And, you know, unfortunately, Haji Matarim, he dies there, and it is believed that the Kramat on Robben Island is this individual, Haji Matarim. I think in the 1860s, 1760s, sorry. Did I say 1744 or 1844?
You said 1744.
1744. Yeah. So in the 1760s, Alawi al-Habashi is released off of Robben Island, you know, to be in Cape Town. He's still exiled, but off of Robben Island. And he's given a very humiliating job or task called a Kafre, C-A-F-F-R-E, as it was spelled. You know, unfortunately, it's a contested term, sort of, you know, but that specific job in that context meant something sort of to the effect of a slave policeman, right? So he had to go police other slaves. But just picture this, you know, you come from Indonesia, well, he was brought from there in a, you know, obviously, you know, they had their class and race issues and so on, but sort of subscribing to them as his people now. And now his people are here enslaved at the Cape, and he has to go around policing them. You know, so how dehumanizing must that feel, you know, to make sure your own people, you know, are kept in line as slaves.
Yeah.
But subhanallah, you know, with the amazing character that he had and the luminary that he was, he used his positioning to his advantage. And so there's oral histories and reports of how, so bear in mind, slaves were not allowed to wear shoes, right, at the time. So they would say that he would walk into the slave lodge, you know, he was allowed to as a kafre, with shoes under the one hand or under the one arm and a kitab, let's say a Quran, under the other. And he would give the slaves, shoes to wear, sort of as a sense of, lifting them off of the ground physically, but also as a sense of upliftment. And with the Quran, he would then teach them, the teachings of Islam. And a concept that I like to use in this context is, the ideology of liberation. So Islam at the Cape was really an ideology of liberation, where it came to liberate slaves mentally, from the physical shackling of slavery at the Cape. And I will explain a bit more about how that manifests later on in the community, particularly through our next individual, Tuan Guru. His name is on the lips of many people in Cape Town. Many talks are given these days that touch on Cape Islamic history. Tuan Guru is referenced often. And Tuan Guru was also one of these orang kaya, these noblemen. Himself was the son of a qadi, a religious judge, right, on the island of Tidore in Indonesia, present-day Indonesia, Southeast Asia. And he was also related to the Sultan. And because of his family positioning and his own scholarship, having been trained, in the classical studies, he became an imam. He also became an imam of, the Sultanate. So he was like the court imam, sort of, of the whole kingdom. And so too, he was also an advisor, not just religiously, but I'm sure as well, politically as well, to the
And he would be seen as a threat
to
the Dutch, and that's why he was brought to...
Exactly. Okay. And so he is brought to the Cape as well. Tuan Said Alawi is off the island by the time that he arrives in around, I think 1780. I can't remember my dates perfectly right now, but it's easy. It's a Google actually these days to just check those dates. But he's placed on the island. He sees the circumstances. He's taken off the island because the British are attacking. And he's made to walk from Saldanha Bay all the way around. Imagine walking in the sand, shackled. The guy's like, 70 years old. And he's made to walk from there all the way to Cape Town.
So he was 70 when he came here?
I think he was like, in
advanced age?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So his journey at the Cape influencing the new Muslim community was at the age of 70.
Yeah,
wow.
But also understanding, and I think that's why it's, I will come to this, but also why it's so important to look at the lives of these individuals and understand, the benefits of the wisdoms that they have at that age also. Because I am youth, you are youth. Sometimes, the old people talk to you. It's, sometimes we're a bit ignorant about it, or we're very, arrogant in not wanting to listen to them because they are old. What do they know? They don't understand, the current context and so on. But Tuan Guru was, look at his age, right? He was, in his he would be a late pensioner, in those days. But he understood the current context and he could, curate a community, and create a community, in such difficult times and at such an age, So just to think of what he had to go through and also his expertise and the wisdom and knowledge that he was able to contribute, to a society that, created this community. And so after he's made to walk, all that distance, also think of the struggle that he went through, him and the others having to walk that.
From Saldanha Bay to? From
Saldanha Bay to Cape Town.
Wow.
Yeah. Just walking alone is already a mission. Then he's walking in chains. Then he's walking on beach sand.
At the age of 70.
At the age of 70. Maybe 70, I don't know.
But at an advanced age.
But at a very advanced age. Yeah, he was al grys al, Yeah. So, yeah. Also, I'm just thinking of in Surah Maryam, is it Nabi Zakaria? He's complaining to Allah about his grey hair and his own old age, and he's asking Allah for a successor. And so just relating, Tuan Guru to a Nabi Zakaria type, individual at the Cape, where there is no successor, because he's this old man. There's not really a community. They are Muslims separately, but there's no Islam.
Yes.
Right? And so him making dua to Allah, similarly, I'm old, I'm grey, what is he going to do? And as Allah gives Nabi Zakaria Yahya, Allah gives Tuan Guru a child in the form of a community. Subhanallah. Yeah.
And what lessons do you think we, as young people in today's world, if you look at how that community was built and structured, what can we learn from that in terms of projecting forward now to our own communities, going forward?
I think just touching back on that, that concept of, the ideology of liberation, I mentioned Tuan Said Alawi, also Tuan Guru, his teachings at the Cape in a similar style, understanding the context of colonialism. They were not FARC, they knew what was happening. They were politicians,
So to be involved in your community in today's world?
Definitely from that perspective, but what I'm getting at is that they understood the context and they understood the type of techniques you need to apply to combat that, despite not having the agency to physically fight back against the system. And so, what applications would you put in place, and what systems would you put in place to combat this? And it seems that not just from a Muslim perspective, but also from this, perspective, is the creation of the madrasa, teaching people, and it shows how education is really key to empowering a community and empowering people, and not just, think like there isn't a Muslim community, there are these scattered Muslims, and not all the slaves were Muslim, not all the slaves came from Indonesia, some came from West Africa, East Africa. Slaves were brought from Surat in Gujarat, You think of Surti people, you think of a specific identity. There were Surti slaves that were brought here, from East Africa, West Africa. I saw even some slaves from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil.
In Cape Town?
In Cape Town.
Wow.
Were brought from there, to this harbour. So, the percentage of slaves that were Muslim is not as much as how we think of it, as a Muslim community, as a post-slave community today. And so you can then well imagine how did Islam grow at the Cape? All these also cultural and tribal Muslims, that had their own sometimes folk beliefs and syncretic beliefs in both Islam and spirits and these things. And Tuan Guru, he brought all these people together within a madrasa and sort of standardized a type of Islam at the Cape, which today we still refer to as tartib. If you are tartib, you follow the specific repetition or this pattern. And it was through this tartib, that maintained a sense of community here at the Cape. But coming back to my initial point, is that it's in this madrasa where these, similar to Tuan Said Alawi, this ideology of liberation, teaching people that, despite the fact that you are enslaved, they can't take your time, they can't take your mind, they can't take your iman. And it's your iman and your faith, that really frees you. And where do we actually find evidence of this? In 1825, one of his students, by the name of Imam Muhyiddin, or he's written as Mudding in the documents, there's an interview called the Briggs interview, right? Where they interview like two imams about different things about Islam. And one of the questions is, tell us, like, in your religion, what does it tell you about slavery? And Imam Muhyiddin's response is that, we teach them that, when they come in our community, when you come into the mosque, although your body might be enslaved and enchained, your mind and your soul is free. And you must look up to God to free you when you die. So look at look at what they are teaching them.
This is in 1820.
1825. 200 years ago, in Cape Town, they are being taught about liberation of the mind, liberation of the soul, and the circumstances of your surroundings and your body is negligible, as compared to the shackles of your mind. So really freeing your mind from the systems of oppression.
And how does one free the mind? How does one free the soul in today's world?
So then we also, well, I suppose I can only look at in 1820s world now.
But now,
to just some techniques that I looked at, that was applied at that time was unity, bringing people together, and creating systems and structures.
And unity that wasn't conformity, but unity that was different people coming together.
Exactly.
There was a common base, but people were still different to each other. Okay.
I mean, there were many. There were West African slaves that were Muslim. There were Indian slaves that were Muslim. There were slaves from all throughout Southeast Asia, East Asia, that came to the Cape, and many of them had embraced Islam and all formed part and mixed with each other.
And they were united together.
They were united together.
So this idea of unity, we've already established that unity in the past. But today, one could argue that we were actually more separated than what we used to be.
Look, the fracturing, occurred in that. Even in the Prophet's time, there was fracturing. Yeah. Fracturing is I suppose it's part of society. It's bound to happen. But I think we must look past, the physical fractures and understand, the unity in terms of, our thinking and our maqasid, our objectives. And for example, in the Awal community, as many term it, there's evidence of a Baytul Mal that they had, dating back to the earliest date I could find was like 1797. 1797, 230 years ago, they had a collection of money. And I think these are slaves, these are oppressed people, and still they are willing to sacrifice. They are willing to give of their money, for a common goal, for a common purpose. Perhaps it was to free other slaves, to feed people. Our culture of barakat in Cape Town, we could possibly trace it back to that point. But this is just one instance, of having this common objective, this common goal, to free ourselves, mentally, from the oppression that we find ourselves in.
So Abdud-Daiyaaan, we are reaching towards the closing stages of the interview. I feel like we could go on a lot longer, but the third part of our segment that we wanted to talk about is what's going on in Gaza, in Palestine. Our brothers and sisters obviously suffering so much, and we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them ease. All those that have passed away, Allah accepts their shahada, their witnessing, and their martyrdom, inshallah. But given the discussion that we've just had about the early Cape Muslim community, our relationship with apartheid, our relationship with psychological emancipation, what lessons can we take from that to the present conflict in Gaza?
So, look, I mean, a fact is that we still suffer from oppression, in the Cape, in many different systems, that are enacting, such as, neoliberalism, capitalism, and so on. So, before I can think of lessons, it's first, looking at the similarities, that we find ourselves in, between, the Gazans and the people here at the Cape. And perhaps looking at what happened to us and what's happening to them now, and how did we move forward, what positives and negatives were there to that. Yeah. And, I mean, who are we to advise them, number one, but also perhaps a twinkling of hope, to them, that we have indeed overcome apartheid, and it is possible, for the circumstances to eventually, come to an end. And, similarly, in Palestine, they underwent British colonialism and then settler apartheid with the Zionist movement. Similarly, in South Africa, we underwent, Dutch colonialism, and then we had British colonialism, and then we had like that sort of, interim period, and then apartheid came. But I find it so fascinating how the ideological father of apartheid in South Africa, Jan Smuts, who was the biggest propagator for separate development, was also, a strong supporter of Zionism. He praised Zionism for its intentions, to create this, ethno-religious state that is, specific for a specific people, and to enforce separate development, where this specific group is going to develop separately and exclusively to the other groups. And so not just from a colonial perspective, but that specific perspective as well, we can see a direct link between
the architect.
Yes, exactly. And once apartheid, actually gets enforced, in South Africa, and group areas happens, there they had the Nakba, and they had, what happened in 1967 and so on. In South Africa, we had the Group Areas Act, which forcibly removed people from certain areas, saying that your cottage is for whites only. Imagine that, your house that your family has lived in for 200 years, you sent a letter, sometimes not even in person, and told, you need to vacate this. It is illegal for you to reside in your own house, because this land is land only for a white person. Your floor you're standing on and the door that you're opening is only meant for white hands. So just imagine, the trauma that you go through with that. And then on top of that, or many families, if you could not afford to move to a suburb, like let's say Lansdowne or Claremont. Okay, they were moved out of Claremont, but they were Rylands, for example. Many people, I know of some District 6 people that were forcibly removed, but they were afforded the opportunity to buy land in Rylands and not just kicked, to the flats. And so we can sort of see a similarity between the Cape Flats and Gaza, where, they are moved sort of to, the fringes of the urban, right? So Gaza being like the small strip of land, at the end of Palestine. Similarly, the Cape Flats being, the sort of the edge of Cape Town as we know it. And similar to Gaza being an open air prison, the flats, also the design of the flats, in these closes, in these flats that are easy to police, easy to control, easy to be in charge of and assert your dominance over them. You can see these similarities, between what's going on there and what's going on here. And not to say that it is a symptom of, people moving to these, uncomfortable spaces, these closed, these tight spaces. But you can well imagine a pressurized system, which is packed, is bound to explode. And so when you do see violence erupting, in these spaces, you have to understand the context that it is a closed system and a pressurized system and a dense system that is just looking for an escape. And so on the Cape Flats, we see some of these manifestations, such as gang violence, as a result of some of the poverty. You see a lot of theft going on, theft and petty crime that happens. And in Palestine, for example, not that I'm condoning, what occurred on the 7th of October, but you can imagine drawing this parallel, as a pressurized system on the flats, a pressurized system in Gaza, there's bound to be some sort of explosion that happens.
Yeah. Sometimes you may not agree with a certain action, but you can understand the sequence of events that would have driven that action. And I think that is what has manifested itself. So Abdud-Daiyaaan, looking forward now to our Palestinian brothers and sisters, often the question is, how do we help? How do we offer support? And I think, for myself at least, there's multiple ways. But if you were to be asked that question, if you're a young person right now, what are the different ways that you can support our brothers and sisters in Palestine?
As a young person, we are not earning money to support financially, which appears to be one of the best ways, to assist, to give to Gift of the Givers and some of these organizations that's on the ground and that can physically assist. But the ways that we can assist, in other ways that we can assist, is to show solidarity to existing organizations. Give of your time, give of your effort. As I mentioned, earlier on about doing introspection and finding your skills. See which of those skills can best apply in these organizations. Find your identity within this. Are you an artist? Then assist with creating, reactionary art. Assist with creating art that will change the perspectives of people. because that's really what it's about. It's also about changing, global perspectives about what's happening there. You still see so much denial about the fact that Israel bombed a hospital, I mean, Piers Morgan himself denied it the other day, and many of his interviews actually. I doubt we will change his mind, but hopefully, there are others that we can change minds with. But, let's say whatever skills that you have, try and use those skills, to the advantage. And also, use your agency, use your voice. All of us have a voice. There's not one single human being, that does not have a voice. And use your voice collectively, with everybody else to try and, petition our governments, petition, organizations and businesses to stop the support of Zionism, to stop the support of apartheid Israel. And slowly, similar as what happened in South Africa, where solidarity around the world assisted in aiding apartheid in South Africa. Similarly, inshallah, we can, use some of those similar efforts to stopping apartheid in Israel.
Inshallah. Abdud-Daiyaaan, we have to stop it there. It's been, I think, close to an hour now.
Sure.
But it's been a real pleasure speaking to you today.
Mm-hmm.
And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enables for you to continue learning more and more,
Mm-hmm.
and to inspire us and to facilitate for us to learn more about our communities, and to take that knowledge to think about the lessons for the future, inshallah. And that is all for us today. Every month we have a different youth segment program that discusses different ways in which young people in Cape Town are making a difference, how young people are thinking about problems that are pertaining to the world, and also looking at how we can use our faith. How do we use the Quran, the Sunnah, the vast corpus that is existent within our tradition, to integrate that into our daily lives, to make that our life, inshallah. Shukran to all the viewers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.